amongst others. Our presentation was done with Yesenia Cervantes, Senator Garcia, and Mark Salcedo, and we chose to do our presentation on Currie, Chapman, Catt. So, a bit of historical background. The women's suffrage movement officially started in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention in New York. During this time, the Declaration of Sentiments was written. The Declaration of Sentiments was a document to declare that women deserved equal rights in the U.S., which later they expanded. They started working internationally. The movement prioritized women's rights, suffrage, and it had ties to abolition. In 1861, it was put on hold because of the Civil War, and women in the suffrage movement saw it as a way to gain awareness and by showing their support for the troops. Post-Civil War, there were new tactics, leaders, like including Currie, Chapman, Catt, but also new divisions among women. The two main divisions included racism, and some believe that they should fight for state rights first, while others believe that they should have prioritized national rights. All suffragists backed the National American Woman Suffrage Association, which came to be in 1890 by the merging of two other organizations that backed women's suffrage. The National American Woman Suffrage Association was known as the first women's suffrage organization that everyone in the movement supported. As time went on, women gained the right to vote in 4 states by 1896. The racial division can be seen in the instance that black women only gained the right to vote in 1865. Now, women have the same rights as men, but still face injustices in aspects like pay wage, domestic violence, sexual assault, and more. And on the side, you can see the Declaration of Sentiments right here. This is just a part of it. And then right here, we can see a bunch of women who were involved in the National American Woman Suffrage Association. And then right here is the event that happened in 1913, where the NALSA, the National American Woman Suffrage Association, organized a parade on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And it was one of the biggest displays of support for women's suffrage in its time. And then another important event that happened was in 1916, the first woman was elected into Congress, and her name was Jeanette Rankin. And this was important because, you could probably see how what she did would inspire women to pursue powerful places in office and just in the U.S. in general. Yeah.
Personal life and achievements. Currie Chapman Catt was born in Ripon, Wisconsin on January 9, 1859. She was the daughter of two farmers, Maria Clinton and Lucas Lance, who farmed in Potsdam, New York. She was the second of three children, and when she was 7, her family relocated to Iowa. She got married to Leo Chapman, who later on died from typhoid fever. When she started going to school, she didn't come from a wealthy family, so to pay off her education, she worked washing dishes, working in the library, and she was an assistant teacher. She was the first woman to graduate with a science degree in her class at Iowa State Agriculture College, also known as Iowa University. After college, she worked in Charles City as a law clerk, while also working in a nearby town called Mason City as a teacher and principal. She was the first woman administrator. Her first encounter with the movement was as a teen when she realized that her mother didn't have the same right as her father in voting. She officially got involved in the 1800s when she joined the Iowa Women's Suffrage Association, and she would organize events through the states and worked as a professional lecturer. In 1902, Catt founded the International Suffrage Alliance so that she could spread awareness around the world. When the 19th Amendment passed, Catt helped make the League of Women Voters, giving American women guidance in using their new right to vote.
Carrie Chapman Catt had a grand impact in the reform movement. She was actually the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association from 1900 to 1904. Sadly, when her husband became very ill, she had to step down, but returned to presidency in 1915. She returned with a grand plan, so she thought. It was to have two phases, reduce the resources in the southern states that were taking up too much money, but it was unsuccessful. So she started working with the NWP, most notably Alice Paul, to create an amendment in 1916. This was to give the right to vote to women. Although it was a lot of help, it was not smooth sailing. She struggled to agree with Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who she worked closely with, because they favored militant actions. This was mostly shown in when they picketed the White House during World War I. She believed this was not the right take and they shouldn't have done this just due to the fact of being a sensitive time. But it was a good way to let their voices be shown. So she continued her own plan. Her plan was a state by state suffrage campaign that took her to New York in 1917. She met many suffrage groups who she later introduced to the Women's Suffrage Party, helping them get a victory for the suffrage groups in New York. After this, the amendment of women getting the right to vote passed. So she made the League of Women Voters. This was a group for women to be educated in politics, which is still very much alive today and work with some of her sponsors here at Cristo Rey. She also notably made a book, The Women, Suffrage and Politics, The Inner Story of the Suffrage Movement. This book was to show the inside story of everything she had to struggle with to give us this right. She was also a strong advocate for child labor and world peace.
Carrie Chapman left great inspiration for all people in the modern day today to fight off of. Carrie Chapman's fight for women's rights to vote, as we could see in the picture in the middle, left a great inspiration for people today. We saw that, or we heard the speech of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. That was years after what she fought for. They were fighting for slavery and racism to end. Today, we can see two ways that we are still using her as an inspiration. Women today are fighting for rights in the Department of Labor to get equal pay and to not be treated as differently than men. We could see people fighting for it in the picture to the left. Then, as we noticed last year, there was the Black Lives Matter movement, where people were fighting for equalization amongst the different races that there were. They were fighting for black to be treated just as white, just as the white people would. Thank you for listening to our presentation. Have a good day.